"I signed your contract on Tuesday, Miss Caldwell. I've known who you are since then. The question is, why didn't you want me to know?" When Vivienne Caldwell, one of San Diego's most powerful billionaires, decides to test the candidates for her foundation's newest initiative, she does it the way she does everything else: anonymously, methodically, and without mercy. Ethan Morrow is a 34-year-old single father raising his 7-year-old daughter Lily on a teacher's salary and a stubborn kind of dignity. And from the moment Vivienne sits across from him under a borrowed name, she expects him to want something from her. He doesn't. What she doesn't know, what she won't know until it's too late to pretend otherwise, is that Ethan recognized her on the very first day, read the watermark on the contract she handed him, and chose to say nothing. Two people running the same game from opposite sides of the table. One of them is about to find out they were never the one holding the cards. Chapter 1. The contract was 2 pages long, printed on paper that cost more per sheet than Ethan's lunch, and the woman who slid it across the coffee shop table introduced herself as V. Cole, independent education consultant, like the name was something she had chosen that morning from a short list of reasonable options. Ethan looked at her hand first. No rings. Then at the folder she had set beside her coffee cup, the kind of soft leather portfolio that came from stores where the price tags faced inward. He was a public school art teacher who spent his Saturday mornings at this particular coffee shop on Kettner Boulevard because the Wi-Fi was reliable, and the corner booth was wide enough for Lily to spread her coloring books across without crowding him. And he had agreed to this meeting because a colleague had forwarded him the inquiry and said it sounded legitimate, and Ethan needed the supplemental income badly enough that he had dressed in his better jacket and taken Lily to his neighbor, Mrs. Reyes's apartment for 2 hours so he could have this conversation like an adult. "Thank you for making time," V. Cole said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone accustomed to being the most composed person in any room. Not cold, exactly, but calibrated. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a blazer the color of slate over a cream shirt, and she looked at him with the kind of patient attention that Ethan associated with people who were very good at waiting for other people to reveal themselves. He picked up the contract and read it. He read the whole thing, which he could tell mildly surprised her because most people skimmed. The project was described in careful general language: a pilot educational enrichment program targeting children in foster care and single-parent households in the San Diego Unified District. 4 months of Saturday workshops, art-based curriculum, the consultant, meaning Ethan, to design and lead the sessions, with a budget for materials and a stipend. That, if he was reading the number correctly, was more than he made in 3 months of teaching. He read the number twice. Then he turned the contract over and looked at the bottom of the second page, at the corner, where the paper had a faint embossed watermark, the kind you had to tilt the page slightly toward the light to catch. And he tilted it, and he caught it. And the watermark was a small, stylized C, intersecting with a G inside a thin oval border. And Ethan had seen that logo before, because it appeared on the sponsorship banner at Lily's school every spring when the Caldwell Group's annual education grant was announced at the district ceremony. Caldwell Group. Vivienne Caldwell. He had seen her photograph exactly once in a profile piece in the San Diego Business Journal that his colleague Dana had left in the teacher's lounge 6 months ago with the headline circled. The woman behind San Diego's largest private education endowment doesn't want you to know her name. He looked up from the contract. V. Cole. Vivienne Caldwell was watching him with that same patient expression, her fingers lightly wrapped around her coffee cup, and there was something in the quality of her stillness that told him she was not actually relaxed. She was performing relaxation. She was very good at it. He decided in the space of about 4 seconds not to say anything. "The watermark is a nice detail," he said instead, setting the contract back on the table and smoothing the edge with his thumb. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "The paper," he said. "Good weight. Heavy enough that it reads professional, without feeling like you're trying too hard." He smiled at her with the particular smile he used on school administrators when he needed something from them. Open, easy, not quite reaching his eyes. I have some questions about the curriculum scope before I sign. She recovered seamlessly. Of course. That's exactly the kind of due diligence I'm looking for in this candidate. Candidate. So that was the framing. He was a candidate. How much design autonomy does the consultant have? He asked. The project description says art-based curriculum, but that phrase covers a pretty wide range. I want to know if I'm implementing a structure someone else built or if I'm building it myself. She answered the question fully and clearly, which told him she actually understood the work, not just the optics of funding it. They talked for 20 minutes about pedagogy, about the specific needs of kids in the foster system, about the difference between therapeutic art and academic art, and why that distinction mattered for this age group. And Ethan found himself genuinely engaged, despite the performance they were both running on either side of the table. At one point she said, "You have strong opinions about this," and it sounded like the beginning of a test question rather than a compliment. "I teach 23 kids a day who've been told their opinions don't count," he said. "Strong opinions are what I have instead of a pension." She wrote something in a small notebook. He watched her write it and thought about the watermark and about the folder and about the way she had paused for just a fraction of a second when he said the thing about not trying too hard. And he thought, she is very smart, and she is looking for something specific, and she has not found it yet. And whatever it is not credentials. Near the end of the meeting, she said, "I'd like to schedule a follow-up session next Thursday. There would be a short presentation to some of the project stakeholders, nothing formal, just an opportunity to discuss the curriculum vision with a few people who have invested interest in the outcome." Ethan pulled out his phone and looked at his calendar. Thursday at 6:30 was Lily's parent-teacher conference at Clearwater Elementary, a meeting he had requested himself 3 weeks ago because Lily's reading comprehension scores had dipped, and he wanted to talk about it before the quarter ended. "I have a prior commitment Thursday evening," he said. V. Cole's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "This would be fairly important for the project moving forward," she said. "The stakeholders have limited availability." "I understand," he said. "I'm available Friday morning from 8 to 10 or any time the following week. If those don't work for the stakeholders, I'm happy to submit a written overview of the curriculum vision in advance of whatever meeting time works for them." She looked at him for a moment that was slightly longer than necessary. "What's the prior commitment, if you don't mind my asking?" "A meeting at my daughter's school," he said simply, and did not offer anything further. She wrote in her notebook again. Then she said, "Friday morning works?" And the way she said it, unhurried, like she had just received some piece of information she intended to examine later, made Ethan think that the Thursday request had not been logistical. It had been deliberate. He signed the contract before he left. He used the pen she offered, which was the kind of pen that cost enough to be noticed, and he signed both copies cleanly and slid them back across the table. And he stood and shook her hand and told her he looked forward to the Friday meeting. And then he walked to the door of the coffee shop and held it open for an older man coming in behind him without making anything of it. Outside on the sidewalk in the bright January light, he took out his phone and opened his camera and photographed both pages of his copy of the contract, the watermark visible in the upper left corner of page 2, clear enough to read. He texted the photos to his attorney, a woman named Claire Osei, who had handled his divorce 2 years ago, and who he paid on retainer for exactly the kind of low-grade precaution that single parenthood had taught him to maintain. He typed, "Can you run the registered entity on the watermark, oval logo, C and G overlapping? Education adjacent, San Diego." Claire replied in 11 minutes. Caldwell Group, LLC, parent entity Caldwell Meridian Holdings, Vivienne A. Caldwell, sole principal. "You want me to look deeper?" he typed. "Not yet. Just wanted to know who I was talking to." Then he walked to Mrs. Reyes's apartment to pick up Lily, and when his daughter ran at him from the hallway with her arms out and both knees of her leggings grass-stained from the building's small courtyard, he caught her and swung her up and did not think about Vivienne Caldwell for the rest of the afternoon. But that night, after Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet, he sat at the kitchen table with his copy of the contract under the overhead light and thought about the question the woman had not asked. Not "who are you?" but "what do you want?" And he thought about the fact that she was watching him to see what he would do when tested. And she did not yet know that he had noticed he was being tested. And for now, that gap between what she knew and what he knew was the only leverage he had. He was going to be careful with it. He folded the contract, put it in the folder with his other important documents: Lily's birth certificate, the custody agreement, the insurance paperwork, and turned off the kitchen light. Chapter 2. The Friday morning presentation took place in a conference room on the 14th floor of a glass tower in the East Village that V. Cole had described as a co-working space we use for project meetings, which was technically true, the way it was technically true that the Pacific Ocean was a large body of water. The room had a view of the bay, a long table of pale wood that seated 12, and a small placard near the door that read, "Caldwell Group Innovation Suite B," which no one acknowledged. Ethan acknowledged it to himself and sat down at the table. There were 4 other people in the room. A woman from the San Diego Unified District Office who introduced herself as the grants coordinator, a soft-spoken man who said he worked in child development research at USD, and 2 people who did not introduce themselves at all and sat at the far end of the table taking notes. Vivienne V. Cole sat at the head of the table and ran the meeting with the efficiency of someone who ran all of her meetings the same way, which was to say that she set the agenda, controlled the pace, and gave no visual indication of where she stood on anything until she had heard everyone else speak first. Ethan presented the curriculum framework he had drafted in the 3 days since their initial meeting. He had built it around a concept he called visual autobiography, the idea that children who had experienced instability could use art not to express feelings they couldn't name, but to construct a coherent narrative of their own experience, to become the author rather than the subject of their story. He spoke for 12 minutes without notes. He answered 3 questions from the grants coordinator and 1 from the child development researcher, and none from the 2 silent people at the end of the table. Vivienne asked 2 questions. The first, how do you measure outcome in a program like this, given that the primary benefit is developmental rather than academic? The second, which came after his answer to the first, what happens to the work the children make? That second question surprised him, not because it was unexpected, but because it was the right question. The one most grant-funded programs never asked. The one that got to the heart of whether the adults running these initiatives actually understood what it felt like to be a child who made something beautiful and then had it taken away, or filed in a folder, or displayed on a wall for visiting donors and then thrown out when the program ended. The children keep their work, he said. Every piece. If they're in a placement without stable storage, we provide archival boxes they take with them. The work belongs to them. That's not negotiable. Vivienne looked at him for a moment and then wrote something in her notebook. He noticed she had the same notebook from the coffee shop, a small black soft-cover thing, and he wondered if she took notes on everyone she tested, or if he had warranted a special level of documentation. After the meeting, she stopped him in the hallway outside the elevator. The other attendees had already left. I'd like to discuss the next phase of onboarding, she said. There's a financial support component for participating consultants that I want to walk you through. All right, he said. They went back into the conference room, just the 2 of them, and she sat across from him and opened a folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It outlined a supplemental personal grant not part of the project stipend, separate of $35,000, described as a family stability supplement for consultants with dependents. The language was careful, and the number was large enough to be meaningful without being so large it felt like a bribe. And Ethan understood immediately that this was a test within the test. Would he take the money? Would he ask questions? Would he get deferential or grateful in a way that compromised his professional posture? He read the sheet thoroughly. Then he slid it back to her. I appreciate the intention behind this, he said. but I'd like to decline the personal supplement and redirect that amount toward the program's scholarship fund, if that's an option. If the goal is family stability, it's more efficiently achieved at scale than individually." She looked at the sheet he had returned to her. She did not look surprised, but her stillness had a different quality now. Not the performed calm from the coffee shop, but something more like genuine consideration. "That's an unusual response," she said. "It's a straightforward one," he said. "My daughter is taken care of. These kids aren't. If you have $35,000 looking for a family to stabilize, there are about 40 families in this program who need it more than I do." Vivienne picked up her pen and did not write anything. She just held it. "I'll take that under advisement," she said, finally. He nodded and stood, and as he picked up his bag, she said without looking up from the folder, "You have a daughter. How old?" 7, he said. "What's her name?" He paused just long enough to notice that he was pausing. "Lily," he said. "Does she know what you do for work?" "She thinks I'm a professional crayon sharpener," he said. "We're working on the more nuanced explanation." He heard what might have been the very beginning of a laugh. Not a full one, just the intake of breath before one. And then she controlled it, and by the time he looked at her, she was composed again. But the breath had been real. He filed it away. That evening, shortly after 7, he received a call from an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was silent. Not a misdial, but someone who had listened to the greeting and then said nothing. He noted the time, wrote it down in the small notebook he kept on the kitchen counter for Lily's school appointments and medication reminders and other practical things, and added it to the growing column he had titled simply, Marcus. He did not know yet who Marcus was, but Claire had mentioned in a follow-up text that afternoon that the Caldwell Group's primary operational contact across all active projects was listed as one Marcus Hale, Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives, and that Marcus Hale's name appeared on 2 separate legal filings in the past 18 months related to the termination of independent contractors who had worked with the foundation, both of which had been resolved quietly. He did not know what Marcus Hale wanted with him yet, but someone was paying attention to him in a way that felt less like evaluation and more like surveillance. On Wednesday morning, Lily came home from school with a permission slip for a Saturday art workshop at the Mingay Museum. A new program, the flyer said, just announced free for all enrolled students. The flyer had no sponsor listed, which was unusual for free museum programs in the district, because every free program in the district had a sponsor listed. He turned the flyer over. Nothing on the back. He photographed it and texted it to Claire with the note, "Third-party touchpoint." Probably nothing. Documenting anyway. He signed the permission slip. He was not going to keep Lily away from a free museum workshop because he was in the middle of something he didn't fully understand yet. That was not how he was going to run this. On Thursday, after Lily was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table and thought about Vivienne Caldwell's face when he'd redirected the $35,000. It was the first time since the coffee shop that he'd seen something real on her face. Not the measured attention of an examiner, but something that looked more like recalibration, like she had been expecting one answer and gotten a completely different one, and the new answer had required her to adjust a calculation she thought she'd already finished. He wondered what the calculation was. He wondered what she was looking for specifically, not the general outline of a trustworthy person, but the particular version of trustworthiness that warranted being let in on whatever it was she was building behind the project. Because there was something behind the project. There was always something behind the project when the project was run by someone smart enough to disguise it this carefully. He did not think she was a bad person. He was not sure yet what kind of person she was, but he knew she was a careful one. And he knew that careful people who tested other people had usually been burned badly enough that the testing felt like survival. And he found, somewhat to his own annoyance, that he was curious about the burning. He was going to have to be careful about that, too. Chapter 3. The Mingay Museum workshop fell on a Saturday in late January, when the marine layer was still heavy over the bay at 10 in the morning, and the museum's main gallery smelled the way good museums always smelled. Like climate control and old wood and something very faintly mineral. Ethan brought Lily at 9:45 and walked her to the registration table in the education wing, and he was signing her in when he heard a voice behind him say, "I didn't expect the lead consultant to drop off a participant." He turned. Vivienne Caldwell was standing in the doorway of the education wing, wearing dark jeans and a pale blue sweater. No portfolio, no notebook. Holding a coffee cup with both hands. She looked without the blazer and the professional calibration like a different version of herself, still composed, but with less architecture around it. "I didn't expect the project director to be running Saturday workshops personally," he said, "because if she was going to maintain the V. Cole fiction, she was at least going to have to work for it." She said, "I like to see the space before the first session." He said, "Sure." Lily, who had been handed a name tag by the registration volunteer and was pressing it onto her sweater with great seriousness, looked up. She was 7 years old and possessed of the particular social directness that 7-year-olds had before the world trained it out of them, and she looked at Vivienne with the frank appraisal of someone who had no vested interest in making anyone feel comfortable. "Are you the lady who's been testing my dad?" Lily asked. The museum gallery went very quiet. Or maybe it didn't, and it just felt that way. Ethan did not look at Vivienne immediately. He looked at Lily, who was perfectly serious and not at all aware that she had said anything remarkable. "Where did you hear that?" he asked her, keeping his voice easy. "You were on the phone with Mrs. Clare?" Lily said with the slightly aggrieved tone of someone who has been underestimated. "You said there was a lady running a test, and you were watching what kind of test it was. And that lady is right there." She pointed at Vivienne with one finger, not rudely, just factually. Ethan finally looked at Vivienne. She was holding her coffee cup very still, and the expression on her face was the closest thing to unguarded that he had seen from her. Not embarrassed exactly, but caught off balance, like someone who had just discovered that the floor they'd been standing on was 3 inches lower than they'd measured. She looked at Lily for a moment, and then at Ethan, and the professional composure was still there, but it was thinner now, worn through in one small place. "I'm a friend of your dad's from work," Vivienne said to Lily, and her voice was only slightly different from her usual register, slightly warmer, the way people's voices shifted when they talked to children without being condescending to them. And Lily accepted this with a nod that indicated she was reserving judgment. "Okay," Lily said, and then she turned to the registration table, because a child she recognized from school had just arrived, and there were more interesting things to attend to. Ethan and Vivienne stood in the doorway of the education wing, with about 3 feet of distance between them and the museum gallery humming gently behind them. And Vivienne looked at her coffee cup and said, without quite meeting his eyes, "How much does she actually hear?" "More than is comfortable," he said. "Less than she thinks she does." Vivienne looked up at him then, and what was on her face was not the examiner's careful attention, but something less structured, something that might have been the expression of a person who had spent a long time being very deliberate about every human interaction, and was currently experiencing the particular exhaustion that came with that kind of sustained effort. "I want to be transparent with you about something," she said. "All right," he said. He kept his voice neutral, which was a choice. "My involvement in this project is more significant than I've represented. My interest is not purely professional." She stopped and looked out toward the gallery, where a docent was arranging small easels in a semicircle. "I've been running something like a vetting process for this program's key personnel because the children this program serves are in situations where trust failures have very high costs, and I am not willing to be responsible for introducing someone unreliable into their lives." She paused. "I'm sure you've noticed. I've noticed the project has a more structured evaluation component than the contract described," he said, which was perfectly true. She looked at him carefully. "You're being generous with that characterization." "I'm being accurate," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the museum, a seagull called twice, then went silent. "I should have been more direct about what this process was," she said. "I'm not sure why I wasn't." "I think you were careful because you've had a reason to be careful," he said. She looked at him sharply, and he held the look without moving. "That's a reasonable inference," she said finally. "You're not wrong." They stood there for another moment, and then Lily reappeared at Ethan's elbow to report that her name tag had fallen off and needed to be reattached. And Ethan knelt and pressed the sticker back onto her sweater and smoothed it flat. And Lily said, "Thank you, Daddy," with the particular satisfaction of a problem solved, and ran back to her friend. And when Ethan stood up again, Vivienne was watching the spot where Lily had been with an expression that took him a moment to read. It was not complicated. It was something close to longing, the kind that a person tried to carry quietly, and occasionally, in unguarded moments, set down without meaning to. He did not comment on it. They walked through the gallery together for a few minutes, talking about the workshop curriculum, and the conversation was easier than their previous meetings, less structured, less freighted with the subtext of evaluation. She had opinions about the sequencing of the morning's activities, and they were good opinions, and he said so. And she looked briefly and genuinely pleased in a way that suggested she did not receive direct positive feedback very often. At 11:15, she excused herself. She had a conference call she couldn't move, she said, and she was sorry to leave before the workshop proper. She said goodbye to him in the corridor outside the education wing, and as she turned to go, she stopped and turned back and said without the careful preparation that usually preceded her sentences, "She's remarkable, your daughter." "Yes," he said. "She is." "You've done something right," Vivienne said. "With her. It's visible." And then she left before he could respond, walking quickly toward the museum's main exit in the way of someone who had said something more honest than they intended and needed to put some space between themselves and the saying of it. Ethan stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he went back into the education wing and helped Lily put on an apron. That afternoon at 4:30, his phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Heads up, anonymous family court filing, San Diego County this morning. Your name. Someone is questioning fitness as custodial parent, citing irregular income and unstable home environment. Judge assigned preliminary review scheduled for 45 days out. Filing was through a third-party legal proxy. I'm digging. Don't panic, but don't ignore this." He read the message twice, sitting in the parking lot of the museum, while Lily ate a granola bar in the back seat with paint on her hands. He did not panic. But he looked at the timestamp on the filing 9:18 that morning, while he had been inside the museum registering Lily at the education wing, and he thought about Marcus Hale, and about the silence on the voicemail, and about the two unnamed people at the end of the conference table who had not introduced themselves. And the particular shape of the problem started to come into focus. Vivienne had not done this. He was fairly certain of that. The filing had the texture of someone acting on her behalf without her knowledge, which was a different and more complicated problem. It meant that whoever Marcus Hale was protecting, it was not her interests he was protecting. It was the shape of access he had to her, and Ethan's arrival in that space had disturbed the geometry. He called Claire. "I need you to pull everything you can on Marcus Hale," he said. "Employment history, any legal actions, anything public, particularly anything related to previous Caldwell contractors." "I've already started," Claire said. "Ethan, this is a family court matter. Even a frivolous filing has to be answered." "I know," he said. "I'm going to answer it. You might also consider telling whoever is behind this that you know what they're doing." He looked in the rearview mirror at Lily, who had finished her granola bar and was now very carefully trying to use a wet wipe to remove the paint from between her fingers, with the systematic focus she brought to all tasks she considered important. "I'll consider it," he said. He drove home. He made dinner. He read 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web to Lily before bed, and did not let himself be distracted by the filing, or the timeline, or the shape of what was coming. When Lily was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook and his phone and his copy of the contract and the photographs on his phone, and began to build what he had been building since Tuesday of the previous week, more deliberately now, with a specific end point in mind. Chapter 4. He sent the meeting request at 6 in the morning, which was early enough to signal urgency without being late enough to suggest panic, and he addressed it to V. Cole at the project email, but copied the 3 names listed as stakeholders on the project charter: the grants coordinator from the district office, the child development researcher from USD, and a third contact listed simply as C. Advisors LLC, which Claire had already identified as a holding vehicle for the Caldwell Group's foundation board. He requested a project status meeting at the Caldwell Group's Innovation Suite, citing the need to discuss a material development in the project timeline. He did not specify what the development was. By 8:30, he had a confirmation, Friday at 2 p.m., all stakeholders available. He spent the intervening days teaching. He taught his 23 students about negative space, about the shape of what was not there, about how the absence of something could be as meaningful as its presence. And one of his students, a 10-year-old named Jerome, who almost never spoke, said, "So the thing that's missing tells you something about the thing that was there." And Ethan said, "Yes, exactly that." He picked up Lily from school every afternoon at 3:15. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He did not tell Lily about the court filing because she was 7, and there was nothing productive she could do with that information, and protecting her from productive anxiety was the job. Friday at 2 p.m., he walked into the Innovation Suite with a manila folder and his phone, and the particular stillness he had cultivated over 2 years of being the sole adult responsible for another person's entire world. Vivienne was already there. So were the grants coordinator, the researcher, the 2 unnamed stakeholders who had attended the first meeting, and at the far end of the table, a man in his mid-40s with the kind of careful, angular handsomeness that came from being very good-looking and knowing it for a long time. The man was sitting slightly apart from the others in a way that suggested authority not quite at the head of the table, but close enough to contest it. Marcus Hale. Ethan had looked up the photographs. Vivienne looked at Ethan when he came in, and the look asked a question. Why had he called this what was happening? She hadn't been briefed, and he met the look and gave her nothing back, the way a card player gave nothing back, and sat down. "Thank you all for making time," he said. "I'll be direct, because I think that's what this situation requires." He opened the folder and placed the first document on the table, a printed copy of the family court filing with the timestamp circled and the case number highlighted. "Someone filed this with San Diego Family Court 6 days ago," he said. "It questions my fitness as a custodial parent on the basis of irregular income and unstable home environment. It was filed through a legal proxy." He let a beat pass. "My attorney traced the proxy." He placed the second document on the table. Claire's findings, 3 pages, identifying the legal proxy as a firm that had been used in both of the previous contractor termination actions. Claire had found in the Caldwell Group's history. The room was quiet. Vivienne was looking at the documents. She had gone very still, not the performed stillness, the real kind. The kind that happened when someone's understanding of a situation shifted faster than they could process. Marcus Hale had not moved. "Additionally," Ethan said, "I want to address something that's relevant context for what I'm about to say." He looked at Vivienne directly. "I recognize the Caldwell Group watermark on the project contract the day you gave it to me. I've known your identity since our first meeting." The silence in the room changed quality. The grants coordinator looked at her laptop. The researcher looked at his hands. The 2 unnamed stakeholders exchanged a look that was very small and very fast. Marcus Hale's expression did not change at all, which was, in its own way, a kind of answer. Vivienne looked at Ethan, and her face was doing something complicated, moving through several things at once. And he had the sense that only one of them was anger. "I didn't say anything," he said, holding her gaze, "because I wanted to understand why the concealment was important to you. I didn't want to foreclose that. I thought if I stayed in the process, I'd learn more about what the process was actually for." He kept his voice even. "I did." "And what is the process actually for?" she asked. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, the very edge of something that he would not have been able to hear 2 weeks ago, before he'd learned what her careful register sounded like when something was pulling at it from below. "That's a question worth answering," he said, "but not before we deal with what's in front of us." He turned to Marcus Hale. "You filed that family court action, or you authorized it. My attorney is prepared to demonstrate the chain of authorization in a follow-up filing that names the principal, not the proxy." Marcus Hale was quiet for 2 seconds. "I acted in the best interests of the project," he said. His voice was the voice of someone who had prepared this answer. "Whose interests?" Ethan said. "The program's," Marcus said. "The children's. A lead consultant with a contested custody situation represents a reputational liability for the foundation. I was doing my job." "Your job," Ethan said, "is not to generate the custody contest and then cite it as a reason for concern." Marcus looked at him with something that was precisely not quite contempt, the version of contempt that people used when they needed to maintain plausibility. "I don't know what you think you can prove." "I can prove the proxy is the same one used in the Alvarez matter and the Chen matter," Ethan said, "both of which resulted in contractor exits that benefited the project's existing operational structure." He paused. "Your operational structure." Vivienne stood up. It was not a dramatic gesture. She simply stood, and the room oriented to her the way rooms oriented to her. She had that quality even in a sweater, and without a title on display, of being the place where the center of gravity was. She looked at Marcus, and whatever she said with her eyes in that moment was not for the room. It was between them 8 years of professional proximity, and the particular damage that proximity did when it was finally seen clearly. "This meeting is going to pause," she said. "Ethan, please stay. Everyone else, please give us 15 minutes. Her voice was perfectly level. There was no anger in it, because she had put the anger somewhere it would not complicate what needed to happen next. That was, Ethan thought, a very specific and very costly kind of discipline. The room cleared. Marcus was the last to leave, and at the door he stopped and turned and looked at Vivienne with an expression that was the most unguarded thing Ethan had seen from anyone in this building. It was grief underneath the strategy. The grief of someone who had organized a significant portion of their life around a person and was watching that organization come apart. Ethan felt something that was not quite sympathy, but acknowledged the reality of Marcus's position. A man who had protected something so long he'd confused the protecting with the having. Then Marcus left and the door closed, and it was just the two of them in the room with the documents on the table and the view of the bay out the window and the light on the water moving the way it moved in late January, gray-blue and restless. Vivienne sat back down. She put both hands flat on the table. "You knew," she said. Not as an accusation, as an inventory. "Since Tuesday," he said. "And you said nothing." "I said nothing." She looked at the documents. "I didn't know about the filing," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not asking you to believe it yet, but I want it on record that I'm saying it." "I believe it," he said. "He wasn't protecting you. He was protecting his access to you." She absorbed this. "He's been with the foundation for 8 years. "I know," Ethan said. "That probably makes it harder." "It doesn't make it wrong," she said. "What I did to you was wrong. The testing, the concealment, asking you to operate inside a process you didn't know the rules of." She was choosing her words with care, but they had the texture of words that were coming from somewhere real rather than somewhere rehearsed. "You deserve to know what you were walking into." "I think you deserve not to have to test people in the first place," he said. She looked at him. "I mean that," he said. "Not as a comfort, as a statement of fact. Something made you think that the only safe way to let someone in was to make the door invisible and watch what they did when they ran into the wall." The room was very quiet. Outside, a boat moved across the bay, slow and small, through the window glass. "The court filing is still live," Vivienne said, finding her footing again. "Marcus's exit from the project doesn't automatically withdraw it." "I know," Ethan said. "There's a preliminary review in 39 days. He said it without inflection, but she heard it, and something moved across her face. She gathered the documents from the table and squared them against her palm. "I need to make some calls," she said. "And I need to make them without you here because some of them are going to be about you, and I want to do that cleanly." He nodded and stood and picked up his folder. At the door, he stopped and turned back because there was one more thing, and he had been waiting to say it since the coffee shop on Kettner Boulevard, and the moment had finally arranged itself. "I signed your contract on Tuesday, Miss Caldwell," he said. "I've known who you are since then. The question is, why didn't you want me to know?" She looked at him across the length of the pale wood table, and she did not answer immediately. And when she did, it was the most direct thing she had said to him since the museum stripped of all the careful management. "Because if you knew who I was, I wouldn't be able to tell if you were treating me like a person or an opportunity. And I've only ever been able to tell the difference in the dark." He held that for a moment. "For the record," he said, "it doesn't matter to me which Caldwell you are." He left before she could respond, which seemed fair given that she had made him wait 3 weeks for a straight answer. Chapter 5. The voicemail from Marcus Hale came at 11:17 that night, after Lily was in bed and Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. The message was 4 minutes long. Marcus's voice was controlled at the beginning and less so by the end, and the substance of what he said was the court filing was not going to be withdrawn because Marcus had structured it through enough intermediary layers that even Vivienne's withdrawal of his operational authority didn't give her direct access to the filing entity's instruction chain. He said Ethan had walked into a process he didn't understand. He said the foundation had standards that people like Ethan, and he said people like Ethan, with the precision of someone who had thought about how to say it, ultimately couldn't meet. He said Lily would be better served by a more stable arrangement. Ethan listened to the whole thing. Then he forwarded it to Claire with a transcripts note. Full recording, no editing, and flagged the threat re-custody case. Claire replied at 7 the next morning. "This is a gift. We're filing a motion to dismiss based on bad faith initiation. I'm also filing a complaint with the state bar against the proxy firm. Can you get me in a room with the decision maker at Caldwell? Not for pressure for a voluntary witness statement. That's the fastest path." He texted back, "Working on it." He did not know if he was working on it. He did not know what Vivienne Caldwell's Friday night had looked like, whether she had made the calls she said she needed to make, whether those calls had changed anything. He knew she had suspended Marcus's operational access. Her assistant had sent an administrative notice to the project group email at 8:30 the previous evening. But suspending access was not the same as resolving the legal situation his access had already created. 2 days passed. The number on his mental calendar, 39, then 38, then 37, ticked down the way numbers did when you were waiting for something you couldn't control. On Saturday morning, he took Lily to the farmer's market on the waterfront, because they went every third Saturday, and he was not going to break the pattern over something that hadn't been resolved yet, and couldn't be resolved by staying home. Lily walked beside him with her hand in his, and a systematic approach to the sample stations that she had refined over months of practice. And the morning was cold and bright, and smelled of coffee and fresh bread, and the salt that came off the water when the wind turned right. He was standing at the olive oil booth when his phone rang. Vivienne Caldwell's name on the screen. Her real name from the number she had texted him the previous afternoon when she said she was going to make calls and wanted a direct line. He answered it. "I have a witness statement ready," she said without preamble. "My attorney drafted it last night. It documents Marcus's unauthorized use of the legal proxy, his access to the proxy firm's contact information through foundation accounts, and his prior use of the same mechanism in the Alvarez and Chen matters." A pause. "It's not a comfortable document for the foundation, but it's complete. I know someone who needs it by Monday," he said. "I know," she said. "Your attorney already reached out. I didn't expect her to move that fast." "She's good," he said. "She is," Vivienne said. "Ethan." A pause, and in the pause was the shape of something she was deciding whether to say. "I also appeared in front of the filing judge's clerk this morning." Voluntarily, I provided a character statement and a summary of the evidentiary situation as I understand it. Another pause. I'm not sure it moves the timeline. The judge still has to schedule review, but I wanted to... She stopped. I wanted to do something that was actually useful instead of just expensive. He looked at Lily, who was now engaged in a very serious negotiation with the olive oil vendor about whether the bread sample could be a slightly bigger piece. "Thank you," he said. And then, because it was the true thing and not the comfortable thing, that took something. "It took less than it should have," she said. I should have been doing things differently for a while." "I'm aware of that." He didn't tell her she was being too hard on herself, because she wasn't. "What happens with Marcus?" he asked. "We've engaged outside counsel for a formal inquiry," she said. "If the findings are what I expect, his employment will be terminated for cause. The Foundation's legal team is also in contact with the bar complaint your attorney filed, and we're cooperating fully." Her voice was steady and slightly flat, the way voices got when people were managing the emotional weight of a thing by focusing on the procedural sequence. "He was with me for 8 years. "I know," Ethan said. "I don't think he ever thought he was doing anything wrong," she said. "I think he thought he was protecting me. He just couldn't distinguish between protecting me and controlling who got close to me." "That's a painful thing to figure out about someone," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "It is." A breath. "The judge's clerk said preliminary review is in 37 days. Your attorney's motion to dismiss will be heard at the same time." "It's not a guarantee, but the clerk indicated." She stopped. "She indicated the new filings were significant." He breathed. He let the noise of the farmer's market settle around him for a moment. 37 days, he said. "I'm sorry it isn't faster," she said. "I'm sorry for all of it." He watched Lily successfully negotiate her slightly bigger bread sample and accept it with the dignity of someone who had argued a fair case and won a fair outcome. He thought about negative space, about the shape of what was not there. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "Vivienne," she said. At this point. "Vivienne," he said. 37 days is manageable. I've been managing worse things than 37 days for 2 years. He meant it. "Thank you for the statement, and for the clerk. It matters." She was quiet for a moment. "You're welcome," she said, and it came out smaller than her usual register, like something that had been in a tight space for a long time and was not quite sure how to occupy the air. "I'll keep you updated on the inquiry timeline." She hung up. Lily appeared at his elbow with half a piece of bread extended in his direction. "It's good," she said. "The olive oil one, I checked." He took it. He ate it. It was good. He got through the next 37 days the way he got through everything in 24-hour increments with Lily at the center and the rest of it arranged around the perimeter. He taught his classes. He ran the first Saturday workshop in the program's 6 children, ages 6 to 9. Each of them approaching a blank sheet of paper with the particular caution of people who had been surprised by things before. And he watched them begin to find their way in slowly, and then with gathering confidence. And it was the best morning he'd had in months. Vivienne came to that session. She sat in the back of the room and did not speak, and did not take notes. And after it ended, she lingered while the kids were cleaning up, and at one point, a 5-year-old named Sophia climbed into the chair beside her and showed her a drawing of what might have been a house, or might have been a mountain. And Vivienne looked at it with her full attention and said, "Tell me about this part," pointing to a corner of the drawing, and Sophia told her at length, and Vivienne listened the way Ethan had noticed she listened to things that actually mattered to her, without any part of her somewhere else. He noted it. He filed it. Marcus Hale delivered a formal written response to the inquiry on day 19. He resigned the same day. The response was 4 pages of careful lawyered language that essentially confirmed everything Claire had already documented while disputing the framing of intent. The proxy firm returned the outstanding fee and withdrew the filing on day 24, citing a conflict of interest with their client instructions, which meant their client had stopped paying them. which meant Marcus's resources were not unlimited. The court formally dismissed the family court action on day 31, 6 days ahead of the review date, based on the combination of Claire's motion and Vivienne's voluntary statement and the proxy firm's withdrawal. Claire texted him at 3:40 in the afternoon. Dismissed with prejudice, no appeal path. It's done. He was in his classroom when the text came through between the end of his 4th period class and the beginning of his 5th, and he sat down at his desk and looked at the words for a long time, in the particular way of someone processing something they have been holding very carefully for a month and can now finally set down. He texted back, "Thank you, everything. Send me your invoice." She sent back a number that was reasonable and a note that said, "Take Lily somewhere good this weekend. She earned it by association." He laughed, which surprised him. That evening at 6:40, someone knocked on the door of his apartment. He looked through the peephole first, the way single fathers and ground-floor apartments always looked first, and he opened the door. Vivienne Caldwell was standing in the hallway of his building in dark jeans and a charcoal-colored jacket, holding a flat, white pizza box in both hands. She had let her hair down, which was different, and she looked, there was no other word for it, like herself, without the architecture. Just herself, in his hallway, holding a pizza. "I heard it was resolved today," she said. "Word travels," he said. "Your attorney told mine, who told me." She looked at the pizza box. "I didn't know if you'd had dinner. I thought this was better than flowers." "It is significantly better than flowers," he said. He stepped back from the door to let her in. She came in and stood in the small entry of his apartment and looked at the space with the attention she gave things that interested her. The bookshelf next to the door that held Lily's school reading in a row, the child-sized art easel in the corner of the living room, the collection of drawings tacked to the wall beside the kitchen that changed month by month as Lily's latest work rotated in. "Where's Lily?" Vivienne asked. "Bath," he said. 7:45 is the estimated completion time." Vivienne put the pizza on the kitchen counter and turned and leaned against it with her arms folded, which was not a defensive posture on her, but an at-ease one, the way she occupied a space when she was not performing, occupying a space. He noticed the distinction. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right," he said. "When you found out who I was immediately from the contract, you had every reason to call it off, or to call me out. The anonymity wasn't protecting you, it was protecting me at your expense." She held his gaze steadily. "Why didn't you walk away?" He thought about his answer. He could have said because the project was real, and the kids were real, and the money was real. He could have said because he'd wanted to understand what she was looking for. He could have said because he was a person who completed things he'd committed to. All of those were true. None of them were the whole answer. "Because whatever you were looking for," he said, "I didn't think you'd find it if I made it easy for you to dismiss me. And I thought if I stayed in it long enough, you'd either find what you were looking for or realize you were looking for the wrong thing." She looked at him for a moment. "And what was I looking for?" "I think you were looking for someone who wouldn't change what they were doing based on who you were," he said. "And I think the problem was that the test itself was the thing making that impossible to find. Because the moment you run a test, the relationship is already conditional, and conditions change behavior." "So the test was defeating its own purpose," she said. "Not entirely," he said. "You learned real things. You just also created a situation where you couldn't fully trust what you learned, because you didn't know what I would have done if I didn't know you were watching." She was quiet for a moment. The apartment was warm, and the pizza was cooling on the counter, and from the direction of the bathroom he could hear Lily humming something that was either a song from the radio or a song she had invented. He could never reliably tell the difference. "Did you ever actually need to pass my test?" Vivienne asked. He looked at her. He had been waiting for that question, not expecting it, but recognizing it when it came, the way you recognized a door you'd been standing near for a while when it finally opened. "No," he said, "but I think you needed to give it." She absorbed that. "That's a very charitable interpretation." "I'm a charitable person," he said. "Mostly." Ask me again when someone files a frivolous custody action against me." Something crossed her face that was the full laugh this time. Not the controlled intake of breath from the conference room, but the real thing, sudden and brief, and making her look for exactly 1 second, like someone who had not been in charge of anything for an entire afternoon. It passed, but it had happened. "There are things I don't know how to do," she said, and the directness of it landed quietly in the room. "I'm good at building things. I'm good at strategy and systems and identifying what's broken and fixing it. I'm not good at—" She paused, looking for the word that was accurate rather than flattering. "Being in something. Being present in something without running the numbers on it." "That's learnable," he said. "You sound very sure about that." "I'm a teacher," he said. "I'm professionally required to believe things are learnable." She looked at him across the small kitchen, and he looked back, and neither of them moved, but something in the room had reorganized, the way furniture reorganized a space when you moved one piece, and the new arrangement was different from the old one in ways that would take some time to fully understand. From the hallway, the bathroom door opened. Lily appeared in pajamas and damp hair, and the expression of someone who had just survived something, in this case, hair washing, which she approached with the same philosophical resistance every time. She saw Vivienne and stopped, looked at the pizza box, looked at Vivienne again. "Did you bring dinner?" she asked. "I did," Vivienne said. "Is it the kind with the round pepperoni or the square pepperoni?" "Round," Vivienne said. Lily considered this. "That's the right kind," she said, and climbed onto a kitchen stool and folded her hands on a counter, with the patience of someone prepared to wait for the appropriate adults to distribute the meal. Ethan opened the pizza box. Vivienne found plates in the cabinet second try, which meant she'd guessed reasonably, and the three of them sat at the kitchen table, and Lily narrated the events of her day with her customary thoroughness, while the pizza got eaten and the apartment got quieter, the way apartments got quieter when the activity inside them was ordinary and comfortable, and not performing itself for an audience. At one point, Lily, mid-slice, looked at Vivienne and said, "Are you going to come back?" Vivienne looked at her and then at Ethan and back at Lily. "I hope so," she said. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her pizza. Ethan did not look at Vivienne after that, but across the small table in the warm kitchen of a ground-floor apartment in a city where the marine layer came in every night off the bay, her hand was resting on the table close enough to his that the decision of whether to close the distance was a very small one. He didn't make it that night, but he noted where the distance was. 6 weeks later, the program's first exhibition opened at the Mingay Museum. 14 children, 62 pieces of artwork, every piece labeled with the child's name and age, and a single sentence they had written themselves about what the work meant to them. Sophia, now 6, had a drawing of a house that turned out also to be a mountain, and the sentence beside it said, "This is the place I made up, where everything I need is there." Vivienne stood beside Ethan in front of Sophia's drawing and did not say anything for a long time. "You named it right," she finally said, not to him exactly, but in his direction, the way people said things that were for one person when they were not quite ready for it to be entirely direct. The program, visual autobiography, the whole idea. "Sophia named it," he said. "I just gave her the paper." She looked at him sideways, and there was something in the look that was neither the examiner, nor the careful strategist, nor the woman in the hallway holding a pizza, but some version that was building quietly out of all three of them, not finished yet, still finding its proportions, but real. The exhibition ran for 4 weeks. On the last day, every piece went home with the child who made it. Sophia carried hers rolled carefully in the archival tube Ethan had given her, holding it with both hands all the way to the van that would take her back to her foster placement. And at the door, she turned and waved at him, and then at Vivienne, who had come to the closing day, because she came to all the sessions now, not to evaluate, but to be there. Vivienne waved back. Ethan did not add her name to any list that evening. Lists were for people he wasn't sure about yet. She had passed that a while ago. So, for that matter, had he.